Next, I'll talk about the common tone modulation. This is a method of modulation which is commonly used to move between keys that are single chromatic mediants. The common tone modulation is different from the modulation technique that we learned in an earlier semester, namely the common chord modulation or pivot chord modulation. Now it's a single note which acts as the pivot note or the common tone connecting the two keys. And it's common for that common tone to be a note that's shared between the two tonic triads, although it doesn't have to be. It's also not the case that we can only use common tone modulations for chromatic mediant relations. We can use them for all sorts of different key relations, both closely related and distantly related. The first example I'll show you takes advantage of the one common tone shared between two tonic triads to make a bridge between the keys. Let's take a look at example 27.5. You might want to pause the video so that you can get your book out and find example 27.5. Here's example 27.5. It's by Louise Farranc. And it starts off in the middle of a piece of music so that the key signature doesn't match the key that we're starting in, which is B major. But all of this music is essentially in B major with some chromaticism. Starting in measure 141, we modulate to the key of G major. Again, these are single chromatic mediant related keys. Their tonics are a third apart, actually a major third apart, and they are both major keys. And the tonic notes share a single common tone. B major is B, D sharp, F sharp, and G major is G, B, D, so they both have a B in them. Notice that Roig-Frankely has put a bracket underneath measures 140 and 141 because this is where the modulation occurs. In measure 140, we have the arpeggiation of a B major triad, and we land in the piano part on the downbeat of measure 141 on a B. And then in this measure, we have, starting on that B, we have an arpeggiation of a G major triad. So it's the single note B singled out as the common tone between B major and G major that helps make the bridge between those two keys. Let's listen to this example. That goes by fairly fast, so you might want to back up the video and listen to it again, but I'll leave that decision up to you. Common tone modulations don't need to use a note from the tonic triad, and they're not necessarily confined to modulations between keys that are chromatic mediant related keys. I'd like to look at the next two examples in the textbook, example 27.6 and example 27.7, to illustrate these other kinds of common tone modulations. So here's example 27.6. We're going to start in the key of F major, and we're going to move to the key of A flat major. And the link between these two keys is that the 5 chord in F major is a C major triad or a C dominant triad, and we have a nice 5/7 or C dominant chord right here in measure 11. And then the melody is unaccompanied for a while, but it sort of emphasizes the note C. We have a C on the downbeat, and it's the highest note of the melodic passage. So our ears are sort of focused on the C. And then that C becomes the third of the tonic triad of A flat major. So the common tone in this case, although it is a note that's in the key of F major, in the actual musical example, it's presented as the root of C major minor 7th, the root of 5/7, and then that becomes the third of the A flat major tonic triad. Let's listen to this example.
Kühn nur zum Ziele streben, treu die Hoffnung leben, und aus den Stürmen bricht der Gewährung süßes Licht.
And let's turn next to example 27.7, which hasn't been quite as noticeably marked up for us, but I think that we can figure out what's going on in this. We're modulating from B minor to D major. These are closely related keys. B minor, in fact, is the relative minor of D major. So there are all sorts of ways that we could make the modulation between B minor and D major, notably with a pivot chord modulation. That wouldn't be too difficult. But what Mozart has done instead of using a pivot chord modulation is he's used a pivot note modulation or a common tone modulation. In this measure, measure 25, we have a dominant chord, an F sharp major chord, and then the root of F sharp major is held onto unaccompanied, and that note becomes the third of the tonic of D major. So the pivot note, if you will, or the common tone between F sharp major, 5 in the key of B minor, and D major, 1 in the key of D major, is F sharp. Let's listen to this example. Let me give you one further example, and this is a beautiful example that I have composed myself just for you guys. Here it is on the board. Here we're going to be modulating to keys that are a half step apart. We're going to be going from D major to E flat major. And you'll hear the progression 1, 4, 5, 1. And then the tonic note will become the common tone. It is the leading tone in the key of E flat major. So we're hearing the D as the tonic, and then all of a sudden we're hearing it as the third of the 5-7 chord in E flat major. And it resolves to 1, and then we go back to a dominant, and then we go to 1. So it's a very efficient modulation, and the key is that there's one note, actually I think there are 2 notes, but an important note is D, shared between D major and E flat major. It's tonic in D major, it's the leading tone in E flat major, and it allows us to make the modulation. Here's what this example sounds like. In lectures 3 and 4, I'll be taking up some of the chromatic chords, linear chromatic chords that are discussed later in chapter 27.